Good evening. If you will, join me in a moment of silence. Thank you, and then let's do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, and welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council, March 13th,
Thursday.
2014. Council members, you have your consent agenda before you. There's been a some supplemental information provided to you regarding one of the items on the consent agenda, but if there are questions regarding any of the items on the consent agenda, now would be a good time to bring those up. And if not, is there a motion that we approve the consent agenda?
Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Smotherman.
I've got one comment on one of the items that was on the consent agenda. It was under the Parks and Recreation part of the youth sports concussion policy.
Yes.
I'm delighted that we are taking that as seriously as we are, because that is a problem that has been recognized both at the professional level, college level, and high school level, and now we're carrying it down to the youth. And so for the parents who get excited when their child's taken out of the game, it's purely precautionary, but it's very important that we continue to have that precaution with these children, because the intention is not to get the child out of the game, but it's to err towards the side of safety at all costs. And that's a really good move, and I want to recognize our Parks and Recreation Department for taking the action on it and doing what needs to be done.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Smotherman. Any other questions, comments? Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I would move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Smotherman.
Second motion.
Mr. Gilly, second. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right. This time you have the minutes of the regular meeting held on March the 6th, 2014. Ms. Machota is speedy on the ball. So if you've had an opportunity to review those minutes as they're presented, is there any additions or deletions to those minutes as they've been presented? If not, is there a motion?
Move for adoption of the minutes, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Gilly.
Second.
Mr. Young, seconds. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington. Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, we have several third readings. Consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to annex an area located along South Church Street and to adopt for the same a plan of services.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Smotherman. Mr. Gilly, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, this time we'll consider for passage again on third and final reading an ordinance to zone an area located along South Church Street as highway commercial CH district simultaneous with annexation.
Move for approval.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Smotherman, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, this time we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along Brinkley Road to commercial fringe CF district.
Move for passage on third reading.
Second motion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And Mr. Gilly, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, this time consider for passage again on third and final reading an ordinance to amend an area in the planned residential development PRD district in Blackman Farms East located along Almar Knott Drive.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Gilly. Mr. Smotherman, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to amend an area in the planned residential development, PRD district in Puckett Station, located along Puckett Creek Crossing.
Move for passage on third reading.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Mr. Young, please call the roll. Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Consider now for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to amend an area in the planned unit development PUD district in Manson Pike Crossing, located along Fortress Boulevard.
Move for passage on third and final reading.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Mr. Gilly, please call the roll. Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to amend an area in a planned residential development PRD district in Liberty Townhomes, located along Cherry Lane.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Gilly. Mr. Smotherman, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance amending Appendix A zoning, Section 2, revising the definition of family.
Move for approval. Second.
Thank you, Mr. McFarland. Mr. Gilly, please call the roll. Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, pursuant to a resolution adopted by City Council on February 13, 2014, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 35.36 acres from single-family residential 15, RS-15 district, to highway commercial, CH district, and approximately 60.4 acres from single-family residential 15, RS-15 district, to residential multifamily 16, RM-16 district, along New Salem Highway. Ms. Sherry Akers, on behalf of the Ms. Myrtle Bell and the Bell Real Estate Partnership, LP, are the applicants. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the February 24, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Ms. Green, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Our first and only public hearing this evening is for you to consider a zoning change request for property that is located north of New Salem Highway, or Highway 99. This property consists of 2 parcels and was annexed in 2005, along with a larger area that had been completely surrounded by the city limits. When it was annexed, there was no companion zoning change request, so per the zoning ordinance, property came into the city with a default zoning of RS-15, that single-family residential district. Currently located on the property is a single-family residence and some agricultural structures, but the majority of the property is undeveloped. The property to the west of the site is zoned RZ and RM16. The RZ portion of property is developed with 0 lot line residential structures, and the property that's zoned RM16 is currently developed with a multifamily community. The property to the east you can see is zoned CF, and that's Commercial Fringe District, OG, that's General Office District, and RM16, which is Multifamily Residential District. The property to the north is zoned PRD, and that's Planned Residential District, and was at one time a part of this tract, but in the past it was sold and developed into single-family detached homes. The request before you today is 2-part. The first part is to zone the property that's shaded in the blue or the purple color on the map before you from its current RS-15 district to CH, and that's Commercial Highway District. The CH district is what we normally see along major arterials, of which New Salem Highway is. They have proposed that the area or the portion of these properties that are zoned CH be measured at 750 feet from the edge of the right-of-way back to the property. The second part of this request is to change the zoning for the property that's shaded orange on the map that you have before you. This property is approximately 60.04 acres, and the request is for you to zone this property to RM16, and that's Multifamily Residential District. In your staff comments, we've also included some excerpts from the zoning ordinance, and they look a little something like this, that give you an idea of the type of development that can be done in the RM16 zone property. I know that was a question before. Of course, multifamily complexes with a density of 16 dwelling units by right are allowed by right, and this development could possibly have 960 dwelling units, considering the acreage and 16 dwelling units per acre. However, practically, we think that would not be likely because there would have to be some land devoted to streets, some land devoted to landscaping, to stormwater management, to buffering, and to just site design. There are also some institutional uses and agricultural uses that are permitted either by right, and that's indicated with the X, or by S, which is special use permit. And if a special use permit is required, that means the use is allowed so long as it meets the conditions in the zoning ordinance, and that would be something presented to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and they would determine whether the conditions are met and the special use permit should be issued for those types of uses. The Planning Commission members, there were 5 present the evening of this public hearing, and all 5 members are recommending that you approve this zoning change. That decision was unanimous. Ms. Cherie Akers is here this evening, and she's representing the applicants, and she'd like to come up and introduce the project. And if you have any questions for her, she'll be available whenever you have them. Of course, if you have any questions for myself, I'd be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing.
All right, any questions for Ms. Green before we hear from Ms. Akers? All right, welcome.
Good evening, Cherie Akers with Huddleston Steel Engineering. As Margaret Ann has indicated, we're proposing to rezone approximately 60 acres along New Salem Highway. The back portion of the property that was shown in orange, as she indicated, we're requesting it for RM16 multifamily. And the front 750-foot depth off of New Salem to the back, we are proposing commercial highway, which would be very consistent with other commercial uses in the area. There's a Walgreens and Publix to the west, and there's also additional gas station and a CVS to the east. And as she indicated, you know, commercial highway is usually what's designated for properties along an arterial roadway. And we are requesting the multifamily RM16 in the back portion, which would also be consistent with other development in the area. There's a 0 lot line development and also 2 other additional apartment complexes in the area. And water and sewer are available along New Salem Highway, and the property has sufficient drainage pattern that we'll be designing when we come in for site plan approval. We do not have a specific end user at this time or proposed actual development. We're attempting to rezone the property, and the property is going to be developed by the Bell family and also Mr. John Floyd. And they are also here to answer any questions that you may have. And they are committed to developing a very nice community project here. So let me, if you have any questions, thank you.
All right, any questions before I open the public hearing? If there are no questions, then I'll open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this rezoning, please step to the microphone and give us your name and address.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Tamara Paxson. I live at 3328 Berryside Drive in the Salem Cove Crossing subdivision. And I am here along with my neighbors from our subdivision. We'd like to thank you for your service to our community in the Murfreesboro area. And we understand that this meeting is for the rezoning of the area that's right behind our subdivision. We do not oppose that rezoning. The reason we are here is to express our concerns for Mershon Drive. Our subdivision consists of 3 streets: Wiltry Drive, Berryside Drive, and Mershon Drive. And we are concerned for the potential for Mershon Drive to become an outlet and a thoroughfare for the other parts that are becoming rezoned. There is another subdivision, a zero lot line, down the road from us, and they do have an outlet that comes from an apartment building through their subdivision. It's caused an excessive amount of traffic, and we are concerned about the traffic and the safety and the potential for that coming through our Salem Cove Crossing subdivision. So we would just like you to take that into consideration in the future when you are planning the streets in that area. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Others wishing to speak? Anyone else? Are we that scary to speak to? All right. If there are no other speakers, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we will consider for passage on first reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along New Salem Highway to Highway Commercial CH District and Residential Multifamily 16 RM 16 District. Yes.
Mr. Gilly was ahead of
Mr.
me.
Gilly.
Could we, Joseph, would you mind addressing her concern? Because I see what she's talking about, because you open that up to Mershon and then you wheel around through there and back into St. Andrews. I can see the concern they're going to have. I know there's a lot of turns to make to get there, but if you could address that, please.
Yes, sir, I will. In fact, I handed her my business card and asked her to stay in touch as development begins to take place. We'll be glad to return to that issue. We discussed it at the Plan Commission meeting. That was one of the issues that was brought up. And this is one of the dilemmas that the Plan Department and the city faces when we see development extend into an adjacent property. The street was stubbed out. We see that. It's obviously was planned for some reason to go in that direction. But what we don't want to see happen is for it to become a collector street, a through street. We want it to terminate properly or promptly tee into another street. And also to design and arrange the streets so that it doesn't become a throughway for coming out to St. Andrews Drive. And the same applies to the other streets that stub into this property. It's one of the things that when the Plan Commission will be looking at this in the future, first we'll more than likely look at a master plan for the property, and then we'll look at the subdivision plats. And I want to see if we can return to that when we review those plans with the Plan Commission. We'll try to keep that in mind with the developers as they come into our office to discuss their development plans. They're here tonight. They're listening. So we'll see what we can do to accommodate that. I think the connection needs to be made, but it needs to be made right. And the right way will not direct a lot of through traffic through that subdivision. And quite frankly, with zero lot line homes, the intensity, the number of driveways, that would not be a good plan to have that as a through street.
And I think you agree. Her concern is very valid, because if you look at that cutting on to Mershon, you can either make a right turn and then there's just that curve that leads you back out to St. Andrews, or you go straight and hit the bulb of the cul-de-sac that goes into that Will Drew Drive, and then you're back with the same opportunity again at the end of that street. So.
That's correct. So the real mitigation has got to be on the development side in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Young, did you have
No.
a question or comment?
That's basically what I wanted to ask him. Mr. Gilly and I were thinking the same thing, and he got to you first.
All right.
So we're saying we're not going to do that. We're going to look at that, what the
In the future.
what they want to do. Okay.
Anything else? Any other comments?
Are there any drainage issues at all with this piece of property as far as water retention? And I guess my question would be, if there is a water retention concern, how do you determine where the retention pond, obviously water runs downhill, but is there a scenario where you go, okay, this is commercial property and this is residential property? Joseph, I'm talking to you, I think. Is there a point where you say this is commercial property and this is residential property or RM property that you would try and move the water one direction or the other, or does it just go where it flows to?
Well, actually, we've already taken what I would call more than just a preliminary look at the drainage on this property. There are several depressions on the property. We're aware of it. Part of the property is kind of rough, particularly in the northwestern portion of the property. That's inherent with land. It's also rough to the north that's already been developed with the subdivision. Most of the drainage will go to the south and will go towards the Spence Creek. In fact, there's a contract tonight for a drainage study on Spence Creek about water quality. We already know where the water will need to go. We've also looked at some preliminary routings for detention areas and stormwater quality areas. In answer to your question, is there a point where we say, well, just because of the environmental consequences, this needs to be single-family, and that needs to be commercial, and that needs to be multifamily? In the case of this property, no, we don't see that kind of a demarcation that's clear enough to say, make that call. I have seen that kind of situation in the past, but this property is not one of them. What we do see is the ability to manage the stormwater properly, and both for quality and quantity. We think that we can do it without seeing any adjacent properties downstream or adjacent to this impacted in a way that will cause flooding on existing development or anything that we've really already got scheduled for development.
That was my concern. Thank you.
Mr. Alott, I think that's good news on the Spence Creek, because I know this time last year, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, that Mr. Huddleston took all of us around, and we went down, I guess it would be Kimbrough, across from Southern Meadows, where we knew we have some drainage issues there, to make sure what we're doing on this site downstream, that we're in good shape as well.
Yes, this is actually considerably downstream from that Kimbrough problem situation.
Vice Mayor.
And Joseph, I assume that somewhere in the future, you'll envision making a connection through those properties back to 99.
Oh, yes, sir, we will.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks.
In fact, in the materials that you received, there's a sort of a concept plan for a lot layout, particularly for the commercial part.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we wanted to make sure of, if there's going to be a commercial area, rather than just an arbitrary strip, that it has sufficient depth that it can be developed, properly buffered, and meet the city's landscaping, buffering, and access requirements. You'll notice that commercial is the very same depth as the Publix grocery store site just to the west.
I noticed.
So are you envisioning that the commercial property will have an access road that goes back through to the multifamily proposed property?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we expect. Actually, and just a little bit more, we always are at the mercy of the state, so to speak, when it comes to traffic signals. It has to meet the warrants for the TDOT. But what we're trying to do is to contemplate the possibility for future signalization of these main streets. And you'll see one of them aligns with the church, the street across the road, and then for another location midway between St. Andrews and the church, so that there's proper spacing to allow it if the warrants are met. And that may be dependent upon the users, how the streets are internally arranged, and that sort of thing.
Mr. Gilly?
Joseph, looking at page 108 of what's on the pad, there's actually 2 potential proposed future access roads through the commercial end of it, provisions made in that layout, isn't there?
That is correct. And we've looked at those as both having the spacing requirements for signalization.
Any other comments, questions?
Hearing none, I'd move for approval.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Smotherman. Mr. Washington, please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. You're free to go or free to stay, those of you who came to hear that. Pursuant to Chapter 11, Section 4B of the Charter of the City of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, will now conduct a public hearing to consider creating Section 33-213, establishing a sanitary sewer special assessment district to be known as the Three Rivers Sanitary Sewer Assessment District. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the February 24, 2014 issue of the local newspaper. Mr. Gore, not accustomed to seeing you so early in the agenda.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Mayor, City Council, thank you for the opportunity. Just wanted to reacquaint you with this topic prior to the public hearing and answer any questions that you may have. We've been working, Water and Sewer has been working on this since January of last year. There were some warranty obligations that were not met by Three Rivers of Rutherford LLC and Claire Vanderschaft, requiring the department to expend about $264,000 in Three Rivers Section 3. The board had requested staff to look at recouping that expenditure. A standard process or standard method of us recouping those funds is through a special sanitary sewer assessment district. What you have before you on page 116 of your agenda is a map shown in purple affecting about 61 acres, which equals about 324 undeveloped lots. It would require about $743 per lot to recoup that expense. Using time value of money at 10 years and 3.5%, that would equal approximately $900 per lot. So that is what we are requesting the public hearing and your approval for tonight.
All right, any questions for Mr. Gore before I open the public hearing? If not, then I'll open the public hearing at this time. Anyone wishing to speak for or against the creation of this sanitary assessment district, please step to the microphone and give us your name and address. Is anyone here wishing to speak? If not, I'll close the public hearing at this time. We'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance amending Chapter 11 of the Murfreesboro City Code by creating Section 33-213, establishing a sanitary sewer special assessment district to be known as the Three Rivers Sanitary Sewer Assessment District.
Move for passage on third and final read.
Second motion.
Mr. Washington, Mr. Gilly, thank you. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. This time we'll consider recommendations of the Planning Director with regards to scheduling public hearings to consider amending Kingdom Ridge PUD along Franklin Highway State Route 96, rezone area along Mercury Boulevard from Commercial Local CL District to Commercial Highway CH District, and rezone an area south of Salem Highway State Route 99 from single-family residential 12 RS12 District to residential multifamily 16 RM16 District. Mr. Adelite.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg. Members of the council, during its regular meeting on March 5th, the Planning Commission conducted public hearing on the matters that the mayor just read into the record. After the public hearings, the Planning Commission discussed the applications and took action to approve all of them and recommend their approval. The council needs to schedule these matters for public hearings so they can take action as well.
All right. Ms. McGannon.
Mayor, I would suggest April 24th. You already have public hearings scheduled on that date.
Move that we accept the city attorney's recommendation.
All right. Mr. McFarland, Mr. Young, thank you. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mayor.
Adelite. This time we'll consider recommendations of the Parks and Recreation Commission as to North Murfreesboro Greenway Trail and an agreement with MTSU regarding indoor tennis facility. Mr. Goodwin, welcome.
Good evening. Mayor and Council, I do have two items for your consideration. The first is the North Murfreesboro Greenway. This is a project, and Mr. Ives is putting up the master plan here. This is a project that we have been working with the Corps on for since late 2006. This master plan was formed in 2007. And we worked with the Corps, and there was about a 70% set of plans that was developed. This plan shows that the trail starts at Walter Hill Park right off 231. It goes under 231, and it runs on Corps property northeast along the East Fork of the Stones River. And if you'll see the first big bend at the top, that's where we're hoping that we can get to in this plan. When we started with the Corps, they were looking at a bigger plan, and that plan has been scaled down some. So they engaged us in 2010. There was a non-committal letter that was sent that said we're still interested in doing this project. And they've been working, trying to get all of their approvals, and they did receive their approval from the Assistant Secretary of the Army, which is the Civil Works Division, on September the 5th, 2013. They did re-engage us. I know that Mr. Ives has been working closely with the Corps, and so has our department. And trying to get this project going. What they're asking for now is they're asking for a letter of request, which we have included into your packet, which would go to Mr. Todd Yin, the resource manager for J. Percy Priest Lake. And that would come from Mr. Lyons that says we're still interested. We would take over the operation and the maintenance at the end of the construction, and that we would be willing to enter into a lease agreement for 25 years for operations of this trail. There would be a second letter, and that letter is included in your packet as well, and that would be from the mayor. And that would say that we're willing to accept the trail with the modifications that has been made, because when we first started, the order from the Corps was that they were going to develop a $10.3 million facility here. It was going to have multiple overlooks. It was going to have 3 different trailheads, and it was going to go for about 3.5 miles. Well, that's been downgraded. The Corps, what they have in their coffers to develop this trail is $4,580,000. The good thing is there's $0 that we have to spend on construction for this trail. So the way this works, and let me just explain the process to you. If the council so chooses tonight to approve these 2 letters, then what will happen, and we have a draft in here of an agreement, there will be an agreement that will be drafted, Mr. Ives and I think, probably in the next few weeks, probably 30 to 45 days, we'll get that back. That would be signed, and that would give the Corps clearance to go ahead. That would be the approval they would need from the city for them to go ahead and start, re-engage the planning process and get all the plans, specifications ready, do the bidding, and build the trail. We think that would take somewhere between 1.5 years and 2 years to the completion of the building of the trail. At the end of when they have that completed, they will ask us to sign a lease. So at that point, once it's constructed, they'll ask for a lease, and then we'll take over the operations of the trail, and we will maintain it through that point of that lease. So we just wanted to make that clear, kind of the direction that they're asking us to go. The physical impact, there would be one trailhead. It would be located somewhere off of Central Valley Road, probably somewhere in that neighborhood where Mr. Ives is pointing. It would take somewhere between 2 to 3 acres. That would be on the Coleman farm. If it's constructed on the Coleman farm, because the Coleman farm was bought with ratepayer dollars at $10,000 an acre, we would need to reimburse them for that. If it's a 3-acre site, we would need to reimburse $30,000. The other portion of the fiscal impact for the city is the maintenance. And we've looked at the maintenance. We think the maintenance will run somewhere around, I think kind of on the high side, $17,500 a year is about what it would cost to do the maintenance. We did take this to the Parks and Recreation Commission on March the 5th. They did recommend that the City Council consider this for approval. And so we're recommending that the city manager and the mayor be authorized to sign the letters that are included, and also authorized to sign any other reference documents, which would be the agreement and potentially the lease, and that the final review and approval for such documents be given to the city attorney so that we can continue the project. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Mr. Smotherman?
I think mine's more of a comment than it is a question. You did an excellent presentation at the Parks and Recreation meeting and again tonight. But I not only like this part of the Greenway, I love this part of the Greenway, because this is a Greenway system that of course, it's not going to cost the city very much money. And not only that, it's not intruding on anybody else's property. This is all Corps of Engineering property. It's property that the Corps of Engineering has already acquired and owns. So it's not that we're going to interfere with anybody. I know several people use this part of the trail as an equestrian trail, and I think it will make it so much safer because of the accessibility to that trail. If there were an incident that occurred along the trail now, it's very difficult to reach those people. This is, I mean, we're talking about maintaining 5 feet of grass on either side of the path is about all we're talking about maintaining. So, if we start out at Walter Hill with a mower and mow 3 miles one way and 3 miles back the other way, we're not really, and I know you're being overly pessimistic on your price of $17,000 a year, because we can do it for less than that. But I think this is a great presentation. I'm glad you've been able to put it together, and it'll be a real asset to North Murfreesboro to improve Walter Hill Park and really turn it into something nice. So, thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, how many linear feet or how many miles or tenths of a mile is the down version of what you're showing us today?
Well, we're talking about, we started off talking about a trail that was going to be 13 feet. We may go down to 10 feet wide. That will give us more length.
No, lineal, how long?
I know.
Okay,
I'm just explaining that.
All right, I'm sorry.
We were 3.5 miles plus when we started. Now we're hoping that we can get close to 3 miles with some modifications, which should take us about to the top of that bend, because it's probably another half a mile around. But hopefully we'll get 3 miles. We'll know when we get into the planning. We'll go as far as we can with the money.
That's a good long way. That's a great.
Any other questions or comments? If not, what are your wishes regarding this recommendation?
Move for approval.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Smotherman, thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye.
Thank you. The second item that I have is the agreement between the City of Murfreesboro and MTSU regarding the indoor tennis facility. For the past year or so, we've been working with Middle Tennessee State University, formulating an agreement that would outline the funding, the construction, and the usage of the indoor courts. MTSU, through its fundraising efforts, has been able to raise and commit basically $1.5 million toward the construction of this facility, and for that they will receive priority usage. And in the agreement, we've already laid out basically the times, and we've asked for schedules, and we've looked at all of the things that MTSU would need. This agreement would be for a term of 20 years. Of course, the indoor tennis facility will be located in Old Fort Park. It'll have 8 indoor courts, and it'll be operated by the Parks and Recreation Department, and we'll be meeting on a regular basis with MTSU to ensure that we follow all the stipulations within the agreement. Currently, the plans and specifications are being drawn up, and they've been finalized. We've got, I'd say they're around 90% complete. We're scheduled for completion, hopefully, of this late fall. The funding is going to come from several sources. Of course, $1.5 million will come from MTSU. $500,000 was contributed by the Christy Houston Fund, and there is money allocated in the 2012 CIP for improvements at Old Fort Park, and then there is also I think $2.7 million in the 2014 CIP, and then also we're going to make several improvements in terms of stormwater, hopefully within the parking lot and the walkways, and we'll be looking for some assistance from the Stormwater Fund. The current estimated cost of the project is $5.4 million, and the legal department and MTSU, the legal department has looked over the agreement. Everybody is comfortable with what's in the agreement, so we recommend that the City of Murfreesboro enter into an agreement with Middle Tennessee State University. The foundation and the university is listed on the agreement, and that the legal department be granted the right to make any necessary changes on behalf of the city in the course of finalizing the document. And I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
All questions? Mr. Young?
Any court rental funds, would that come back to the city?
Yes, all funds that would be collected for the use of the facility would come back to the city.
I understand now that the local tennis players have to go to Nashville to rent tennis time.
They do, and MTSU has to go to Nashville and rent court space as well for their practices.
And as part of our, getting ready for the indoor tennis facility, we did send some of our staff from Parks and Recreation to Springfield, Missouri, which has got a very successful indoor tennis program, because we wanted to learn from them, how do we set up the revenues so that we can maximize, play for the public and, operate it like a business. And so I think they really had a very successful trip and learned a lot.
We did. And we're going to be aggressive where we've engaged the tennis community. They're excited about the new indoor courts. We actually think we're going to be a regional draw. People will, I think, drive from other cities to come and participate here.
Mr. Smotherman?
And I guess if anybody doesn't realize the impact of tourism coming to town for tennis courts, they haven't been out riding around this week and seeing the impact of the basketball tournament has had on our town. Go Blaze, by the way. You were talking about the redesigning of the park and the funds coming. Well, does this include the potential of the redirecting of the traffic, or is that something separate?
This would only be for the site improvements itself.
Okay.
What we're doing is we're working with our consultant on that portion, and we're asking for a cost estimate, and we'll be engaging other departments, and Mr. Lyons and all of us will sit down and look at that. But we think that's the potential for the future and what we need to do at that park site.
I think we all understand that we probably need to improve the flow of traffic going through there, especially if we're going to have Kids Castle still there, we're going to have the tennis courts facility, we're going to have the golf course, and of course the park itself. And certainly, I think the sooner the better that we can get in there and redesign the traffic flow and put a roundabout so that we can direct certain areas and cut certain areas off. I think the sooner the better on that, because I see the potential of risk having too much traffic flowing next to Kids Castle, and there's really no need to mix the traffic. So once we get them into the park, if we could get them to migrate the direction of whatever sport it is they're interested in or type of recreation they're interested in, I think that would be a good thing. So that's all I've got.
All right, any other questions or comments regarding this agreement with MTSU?
Mayor, I might just add, certainly city staff's done a lot of work to get us to this point, but I don't think it would be fair if we didn't point out the great cooperation and relationship we've had with Mr. Massaro and Mr. Farley on this. They've been gentlemen and fantastic to work with.
All right, noted. Any other questions or comments? If not, is there a motion to approve this recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Smotherman, Mr. McFarland, thank you. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington. Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, consider recommendations of the environmental engineer regarding stormwater program update and the Spence Creek Watershed Water Quality and Flood Study proposal. Mr. Huddleston, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg, members of the council. I'm glad to be before you here tonight. And we do have an update on our stormwater program. And as you will recall, last year during the budgeting process, we adopted a 5-year stormwater capital improvement program. That project included 20 some odd projects of a variety of nature, and also addressed about a 5-year calendar. And we wanted to give you just a snapshot tonight as we have been actively pursuing those projects, and as we look forward to the budgeting process for this next fiscal year. We've divided these projects up, and I'm not intending, Mayor, to go over each one of these specifically, but just to give you an idea that we're working on these, what stage they're in, how much money we've spent to date, and you'll see there at in the summaries that we have neighborhood projects. Those are projects that are in our communities and neighborhoods, and they're generally addressing known stormwater problems, flooding and those sorts of things, inadequate system repairs. The next thing we have are water quality improvement projects, and those are projects that primarily would intend to improve our water quality in our local streams and rivers. We have several of those. We have some public drainage and public street participation projects. Manny Avenue, for example, was a project you're familiar with. The Town Creek conveyance is one we're paying special attention to right now, and that's right here in the downtown area. We have a consultant on board to help us with that, with some inspection and evaluation. The Maple Street Alley project's also a public street, public drainage participation project. And then finally, we have some co-joint department projects here where we've leveraged some stormwater funding to help make stormwater improvements with other projects. Mr. Goodwin, in fact, just mentioned the project there with the indoor tennis courts, and we envisioned some parking lot conversion, parking lot improvements at Old Fort Park, and this is going to be a great opportunity for us to accomplish some of those. Be glad to address any particular questions you've got about a project on that list, and would state also that some of these projects go by community or area, so sometimes it may be hard for you to tie that back to a specific program or project that we're funding from somewhere else. So, for example, under the joint projects with the Parks and Rec and school site, the project number 2 there is actually the indoor tennis courts joint project. We list it as the Old Fort Park parking conversion. If you don't have any questions about those specific projects, I'd like to focus for just a minute on the results of an audit for the Stormwater Fund. That audit was completed, and we have year-end reports on that. And at the end of the June 30th, 2013, we had cash on hand of just over $5 million. That was a pretty significant source of discussion for us in the last budget cycle, and as we looked at the Stormwater CIP. And that is up about $500,000 from 2012. We're projecting that to decrease significantly with the projects we have ongoing and some of the billing that stormwater staff knows is out there and will catch up with our funding and budgeting. It takes a couple months for those projects or those dollars to make it to the right place and then show up on our summary sheets. During the process last year, the Water and Sewer Board adopted physical management policies for that stormwater fund, and we also wanted to report to you tonight that we're operating within those policies. The most significant was upper and lower limits on the fund balance, and we're operating between 1 year's operating expenses and 5-year operating expenses in the fund balance or cash on hand, and we're looking to maintain that. And we would look at adjusting the stormwater program if we fall out of bounds on either one of those guidelines. As the budget process is coming up, we'll review the stormwater CIP this year. We've learned a little bit about some of our projects, our schedules, and how we're going to be able to implement those. So we'll look forward to updating those projects, updating the CIP. We may find that in that process we may need to add some projects and reschedule some projects, so we want to take care of that. We've been careful to include projects of a variety of types in there. Quantity projects that would address flooding, quality projects that would address green infrastructure and green improvements to help improve our streams and rivers. We also have included projects that are fully funded by the fund, 100%. We've included projects that are jointly funded where we're leveraging other projects and other money to help accomplish the objectives of our program. And we do all that because we think it's a good idea for us to have a well-balanced, well-rounded program to help address all those things as we're the water resource manager really for the Stones River watershed. And I've listed some uses of our water resources there, and those are important uses, not just for flood control and not just for water quality, but certainly drinking water supply, wastewater discharge, recreation, irrigation, and livestock and flood control. All of those things work together in the way that we want to try to manage our water resources. And in fact, we're the best positioned people to do that, the City of Murfreesboro, through our programs and our residents. And we have the most to gain from that, but we also have the most to lose. It's probably not a week that goes by that we don't read about some city who's under a consent order to improve water quality in their area because of mismanagement. And so we'll be reviewing that stormwater CIP, and we'll be reviewing the budget, and we'll be bringing that back before the Water and Sewer Board and certainly the Mayor and Council here. And so this doesn't really have any action item with it. It's really just an update. Mr. Lyons, Mr. Crumley, Mr. Gore, Mr. Adelot, and myself are here. If you have any questions or discussions, or if you've got any action items, any things you'd like for us to look at a future meeting.
Are there any questions, comments regarding this update?
Thank you. If there are no questions, Mayor, we'll move on to the next item.
There you go.
Spence Creek Watershed Flood Study. I have Greg Judy and Tom Allen here with Neil Schaefer. They're in our audience tonight. We negotiated with Neil Schaefer on a scope and proposal and to study Spence Creek. If you're familiar with Spence Creek, it's a tributary of the West Fork of the Stones River, travels generally parallel to State Route 99 in the Salem Highway area. It's a developing area that I'm sure you're all familiar with as we see the development and growth in that area. And so we're wanting to study that stream, really starting at St. Andrews Drive. Mr. McFarland, if you'll recall, that's the old Kimbrough Road. We're starting right there. We're studying all the way to the West Fork of the Stones River, which coincidentally comes out at one of our Greenway trailheads there on Cason Trail. We're proposing to study that. And if you look at the bullet items, the top bullet for the reason we want to study that area is we have some ongoing flooding problems for the roads and houses right there at St. Andrews Drive. We've got some undersized culverts in there, and so we really need to work in there. You know, it's a complicated flooding issue for us there. It's a FEMA flood zone. We have houses constructed already to minimum elevations through there. And so we think we put together the right team with Neil Schaefer. They're very experienced with floodplain modeling, floodplain management. We have some other local consultants, SEC and Griggs Maloney, that will assist in those studies. And so we think we've got the right team to conduct this study. It's about a year-long project. This was envisioned in our 2014 to 2018 capital improvement plans, and we propose to fund it 100% out of the Stormwater Fund. I will report to you that the Water and Sewer Board approved this at their meeting on February the 18th, 2014. And so tonight we'd like to recommend your approval of that proposal for the Spence Creek Watershed Study. And that proposal is for $306,100. And we'd also recommend that you authorize the mayor to execute an agreement in a form that's approved by our city attorney. I'd be glad to answer any questions about the Spence Creek proposal.
Any questions?
Mayor, he tells us he's got $5 million and turns around and wants to spend 6.5% of it.
Yeah. The area that's flooding is in the city?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If you'll recall, when we annexed that area, we annexed Kimbrough Road. Kimbrough Road's a county road. It has some undersized culverts through there. Shortly after we annexed it and development plans came through there, FEMA updated the flood maps for that area. And so now we have to deal with the consequences of having that being a mapped flood zone.
All right. Any other questions regarding this proposal?
No, Mayor, I move we approve.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gilly. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Washington. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Huddleston. Good report. Consider recommendations of the city manager as to the comprehensive plan consultant and a classification and compensation study. Mr. Lyons, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have two items, and one of the things they teach you in city manager school is the rule of no surprises, so I did not want you to be surprised when Ms. Logan has a birthday on Saturday.
Okay, very good.
Sure, happy birthday.
Please stand up and be recognized, Ms. Logan.
They're done for the first time.
All right, Mayor. I would have never guessed. Thank you. Congratulations.
Don't admit it.
Okay, Mayor, the first of my two items is the selection of the comprehensive plan consultant. As you know, the comprehensive plan really is going to become the blueprint for Murfreesboro for the next 20 years. And while we have a variety of master plans currently, we've not had one in some time that ties all of the elements of the city together. There's some 12 different areas that will be studied, including land use, transportation, housing, utilities, public facilities, and historic preservation, among others. I went to the council last year and asked you all to review the RFP. That's kind of out of the normal process for how we normally do this, but given the importance to the community, we wanted to make sure that the RFP for the comprehensive plan was going to be in line with your wishes, and you all approved that. We issued the RFP, and the city received 12 proposals. Staff has begun to take a look at those, and what needs to happen next is we need to select a consultant. Now, clearly, during the actual development of the comprehensive plan, there's going to be significant community involvement. Staff believes that. As I've talked to you individually, I know you have put a great deal of importance on the public being involved in the development of the comprehensive plan. And before we get to that point, we need to select a consultant. So what I'm suggesting to you tonight in my recommendation is doing something a little out of the ordinary to gain additional community input. Typically what happens when we issue an RFP is staff receives the RFP. We will grade and rank the proposals in accordance with the RFP. There's always criteria set forth in those. We'll select what we believe to be the top-rated firm. We'll negotiate a contract, and that recommendation is ultimately presented to you. However, in this case, in order that we start off with that community involvement, what I'm suggesting to you is that staff would identify the top 4 proposals, that we would conduct interviews with our staff review team, but to include the chairs of the big 4 committee, boards and commissions that are going to have a major stake in the comprehensive plan, that being the Water and Sewer Board, the School Board, the Parks and Recreation Commission, and the Planning Commission. So we'd like to suggest to you that we add those 4 board chairs to participate in the interview process, and that should the community be interested in listening to the interviews, that we have those interviews open to the public. What would then happen, that interview team consisting of staff and the board and commission chairs would then make a recommendation to the Planning Commission, who in turn would make a recommendation to you. Ultimately, the selection of the council is going to be the city council's, but because we want to engage the community early and be transparent about it, I am suggesting to you this recommendation.
The council members that serve on these would not be the members.
On the consultant selection.
You could make the council members ex officio if you wanted to, but in other words, the Planning Commission, you'd have a chair.
Correct.
Okay.
You would have the chair of those 4 commissions actually grading and reviewing the interviews that would be held. We'd probably do it here in the city council chambers, where the consultant would come in, probably have a 45-minute presentation, 15-minute Q&A, and then we would bring the next consultant in. So we try to do it all in one day, then have the evaluation team grade the proposals. There's a scoring set forth in the RFP itself, so we need to follow that. And then have that recommendation made. But if the public wanted to come in and sit in and listen to the interviews, we certainly want to make that opportunity available to them.
And you'd advertise those as public meetings?
Yeah, I guess we could do it that way, Mayor. It wouldn't necessarily be a public hearing, but we want to make sure that
public
if the
meeting.
Public meeting, yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments regarding this? It's a little bit of a change for.
Well, it's a huge.
Mr. Lyons, I'm glad we're doing this. especially something as crucial as this. The only question I had, would you want an elected official on this body to be able to sit and take part in it as well? Or is that, I guess that's asking the city attorney, is that a good idea or a bad idea?
You certainly could do that, especially if the meeting's going to be public and publicly advertised in advance. There would be no reason not to do that. The person from the council would be obligated to vote the same way when it came to the council as they would, as a member of the committee. So that possibility, as legal reason not to do that.
All right, any other questions? Any other comments?
Shane, do you feel strong about adding one of us to that board?
I just think, the only thing I think we've seen a lot of citizen input on this, and something that's this crucial to the community, that I think it's nice to have an elected official on there that, is also hearing from the community as well. And that's just my opinion. I hear from others on that.
Yeah, I don't think the board members generally, or commission members generally, hear from the community quite the way that elected officials do. And I think it's almost being handled as a board. It almost seems like we've got every board we have a elected official represented on the board. I think it would be advantageous to us to have an elected official on there, whoever it be.
Of course, the chair of the school board is an elected official.
That's true, but I think he's referring from this body more specifically when you're using the term elected official.
Right.
You want to just add to that list one of us to be appointed by the mayor?
I think that's a good idea.
Mr. Smotherman's got a very good point. I think the public would be more feel at ease discussing this with us than maybe a department head of one of our major departments. So I think that's a good point. I think it's a good idea.
Just add to that list so one of us to be appointed by or put on there by the mayor.
If you will contact me, council members, if you are interested, I'll make my selection from those who contact me. All right. So you have this comprehensive plan recommendation from the city manager. Are there any other questions, comment?
Mayor, I move for approval.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. McFarland. Mr. Washington, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye.
Thank you, Mayor. I know I was certainly very well pleased with the quality of the proposals we got. These were national firms that submitted, and I think we've got some tough choices to make because there really were some talented planners in that group looking to do work in our community, so we're excited about that. The second item I have is the classification and compensation study. Certainly, we all understand that the city's pay and benefits are very competitive. In fact, over the last 3 years, Murfreesboro has led the state of Tennessee in the amount of pay increases that we have given our employees. We also offer outstanding benefits, and when we look at our typical employee, it represents about 55% of their average salary. So we know the pay and benefits are competitive. We also know that the turnover rate for the city is generally very low. The current pay plan that we have was developed in 2004 by Burris and Thompson. And we have amended that several times since its adoption, but we all also recognize that there's room for improvement, and it's time to take a fresh look at this. So in August, Fox Lawson came and did a workshop with the City Council. We had many of our city staff here. The City Council drafted a document to set as the basis for the RFP to find a classification and compensation consultant. We issued a request for competitive sealed proposals in October. We did receive 3 proposals, and since that time, staff has been conducting interviews both by video, in person, as well as conducting reference checks. And your evaluation team has selected a firm named the Management Advisory Group, otherwise known as MAG. We determined that they were the best proposal for us. They have a large body of work. They've done work in over 24 states in over a 30-year period. They are one of the national firms that does classification and compensation studies. They work for large communities such as Norfolk, Virginia, Lexington, Broward County, the Atlanta school system. So they certainly bring to us a very well-established track record in doing such studies. MAG is located in Woodbridge, Virginia, but they would manage this project out of their Asheville, North Carolina office. They did develop a proposal that was consistent with the document that you all adopted last year. And one of the things that was certainly impressive to staff was the amount of employee engagement that was going to occur this time. In the previous effort, a lot of the work happened in reviewing job descriptions, interviewing some of the department heads, and creating the pay plan. But we're going to take a fresh and different approach this time. MAG uses an online tool called a Job Evaluation Questionnaire, or a JAQ. They will give that to employees. JAQ. I think I got one of my letters wrong. Job Analysis Questionnaire. Stand corrected. But this online tool is going to give employees an opportunity to fill this out and submit it to the project. And that's going to give the employees an opportunity to describe what they do, what their working conditions are, what kind of strategic decisions do they make, what do they handle day to day, what are the other factors that they do in their work for the city. So this is going to give the consultant a body of work and input from our employees that frankly wasn't present in the last study that we had. Additionally, one of the things that was very impressive with MAG is the software program that will be available to the Finance and Human Resources Department. It certainly becomes a very powerful tool for us in reviewing positions, reviewing pay, and running some what-if analysis. MAG has indicated that the project could be complete in approximately 4 months. We certainly want to be very deliberate about this and not rush through it, so we do anticipate additional meetings with employees and keeping them updated throughout the course of the project. So we don't expect this to be done in time for this year's budget, but we could perhaps look at a mid-year adoption for the recommendations that they may come with. We'll know more about the actual implementation date when we get a little bit deeper into the project. In talking with Mr. Godwin today, we would anticipate when MAG would come to town to begin the meetings with city departments that we would have a council workshop so you all could see them as they begin to kick off the project. And then we'll expect to have MAG in front of you a couple more times before the final report is generated. The contract that's in your packet is for $68,400, and that is within the amount we budgeted this year. And I'd be certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for Mr. Lyons?
No questions, Mayor. I move that we approve the recommendation.
All right.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Gilly and Mr. Washington, this is a recommendation to hire Management Advisory Group for the classification and compensation study. It would not be completed this year, is that correct?
Not in time for the budget that I will give you May 15th. They estimated about 4 months to actually do the work and get the report to us. That's what they indicated. I probably want to be a little more conservative and say it might be 6 because we want to make sure that we're communicating through the course of the project and not trying to rush it too quickly. But when we get a little further along, we'll get a better idea about what we want to do in terms of implementing the recommendations. One idea that had been raised was, perhaps looking at a January 1 implementation because we'll have some employees pay clearly that's going to change. So we may look at a mid-year, but we'll know more about that as we get a little deeper into the report.
So it could be early to mid-fall, sometime maybe late third quarter, something like that, and then an implementation date to follow.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Everyone understand that? All right, you have a motion, Mr. Gilly, and a second, Mr. Washington. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, this time we'll consider recommendations of the Assistant City Manager with regards to the 2014 debt issuance. Mr. Crumley, welcome.
Mayor, I postponed bringing up the computer screening. I have updated the slides from our presentation a month ago in case we need to review them. A month ago, Council had an excellent discussion about the use of variable rate debt in the city's overall financing package and how much was appropriate. Particularly, that question was how much is appropriate in the $41.3 million that the city is borrowing currently. We got back together with the city's financial advisors at Public Financial Management, and we've spent the last month studying really 3 different areas that we felt were important in trying to look at what that ratio of fixed and variable rate for the city should be. We looked at our own financial policies to see where we stood balanced against those. Primarily from PFM, we got an excellent education on various types of risks associated with fixed and variable rate debt. And then we also went back and reviewed the current policies and recommendations from the State Comptroller's Office, from Moody's Investors Service, and from Standard & Poor's. Having performed that work, we're coming back tonight with the same recommendation of splitting the city's new debt, $10 million into a variable rate obligation, $31 million into a fixed rate obligation. When we looked at our financial policy, we saw 3 things that we thought were critical in that policy. The city in its policy says that we'll use the method of sale that's likely to produce the lowest total cost of debt. That's not on any one particular issue, though. That is on the entirety of the current $218 million that the city has outstanding. We said the city would avoid over-reliance on variable rate debt because of volatility in the credit markets. You all set a policy that if we exceed 50% in the variable rate markets, we would do that in full consultation with your financial advisors and have those financial advisors make that recommendation to you. We also said that our preferred method is through a competitive bid, and whether we go, particularly in the fixed rate markets, competitive bid is the only way that the state allows, because there is only one vehicle available to Tennessee cities currently for variable rate debt. That competitive sale option is not available to us on that side. From there, we went into this study that PFM led us through on various types of risks associated with fixed and variable rate debt. To make a lot of analysis short, fixed rate debt, less credit risk, less interest rate risk, better in uncertain environments. The variable rate debt clearly is best at matching the life of the assets that the city is borrowing money for to the life of the debt. And that kind of fit back into our policy of saying money that on the shorter end of the maturity schedule, money for computers, money for equipment, other things that are 7 to 10 years in their useful life are really very good candidates for using variable rate debt. The third place we went and looked was at the current recommendations from the State Comptroller, from Moody's Investors Service, and from Standard & Poor's. The Comptroller does not currently, nor do the state's financial policies, have a percentage ratio of variable to fixed rate debt. However, the state's financial policies limit the use of variable rate debt to 10 years and less on the maturity curve. Moody's uses 2 different measures in terms of its variable rate debt. They prefer to see communities have 25% or less of their total debt in a variable rate instrument. We're currently at 45%. They also take a measurement of the variable rate debt exceeding 50% of annual operating revenues. Because Murfreesboro has been a very fast-growing community, we've used both fixed and variable rate debt. We currently stand at 85% of an annual operating budget to cover the variable rate debt that's outstanding. S&P, and the mayor has a bit of an announcement that he can let you all in on. S&P has just upgraded the city's bond rating to AA. They did not mention the amount of the variable rate debt specifically in their analysis of the city. They did mention to some degree the overall debt load and considered it moderate. The down mark that we received on debt was how fast we repay it, which means our annual operating budget has a very high percentage of dollars going to repay interest and principal on the debt. All that having been said, we came back with the exact same recommendation that we brought to you a month ago of taking the short-term items, primarily the computer purchase for the city schools, the various pieces of equipment. There's $1.3 million for solid waste equipment. I think there's $1.25 million for a police car fleet. All of those items that we felt had 10 or less years of life expectancy, we're recommending that in the variable rate financing. The $31 million that is principally Overall Creek Elementary School and the purchase of Highland Avenue for a new police headquarters, we're still recommending that we fix that in today's environment. Josh McCoy, our PFM financial advisor, kind of gave us an update on interest rates today. There are some variabilities in the market right now, but he thinks we would still, in a fixed rate environment, probably be less than 3% on the interest rates the city would see on a variety of proposals. I can go through the ratios and the financial policies. I did update all those graphics. There is the graphic that Councilmember McFarland asked for in terms of the uses of the various types of debt we've got out there. Be glad to try to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Mr. Crumley regarding the 2014 debt issuance?
I have one question.
Mr. Young.
Mr. Crumley, on our fixed rate debt, do we pay for it, do we start paying for the whole amount as we draw it down?
To this particular bond issue, the answer would be yes. However, to remain competitive, the various banks have structured their fixed rate money now to what we've always seen on the variable rate financing, to where they will in effect allow you to have a construction draw on that money during the construction cycle of a project. In this particular bond issue, we have already, Ms. Wright has already expended more than $20 million of the $41 million total. So very much of this issue will go to reimburse the city's coffers on the very first day.
The school technology and the school building and the school road.
Highland Avenue has already been purchased.
Existing cash.
Right. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
While y'all are mulling, Standard & Poor's has raised its long-term rating for the city of Murfreesboro to AA for its general obligation bonds. And this periodic review of the city by Standard & Poor's is based on S&P's new criteria issued in September 2013. So that's, I'm sure there'll be an announcement later, but that's certainly good news, and I think well-deserved. All right. What are your wishes regarding this recommendation? Hello.
Move for approval.
Mr. Young,
Yes, ma'am.
if you turn to the last page of Mr. Comrie's report that lists 2 resolutions, we would need to vote on the resolutions separately and by number, if you please.
Is it number 1 or number 2?
No, as Resolution
That's not bad.
14R06 and as Resolution 14R07.
14R06 is for the sale of $31,350,000 in general obligation fixed rate debt. Resolution 14R07 is for $10.43 million in variable rate debt through the Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund.
Those 2 collectively represent the recommendation you're making.
Those 2 collectively
because-
represent the $41.3 million total.
Because they have to be broken into separate resolutions, you need separate votes for each one.
We're probably borrowing them. We could be borrowing the money from 2 separate entities.
Mr. Mayor, I move for approval of Resolution 14R06.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. As to 07,
I move for approval and adoption of Resolution 14R07.
Second.
thank you, Mr. Gilly. Mr. Washington, on 07, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Beer permits, Ms. Wright.
Mayor, we have several tonight. The Chamber of Commerce has caught an error on their initial request for an event to be held in December. They had requested on the application for an event date of December 8th, and they realized that was incorrect, and so we're asking permission to reissue that special event permit for December the 9th. The Center for the Arts has requested a special event permit for an event to be held at the Pinnacle National Bank parking lot on March the 29th. And those two applications have met our requirements. We also have an ownership and name change for a restaurant inside the Clarion Hotel at 2227 Old Fort Parkway. We are still waiting on the building code's approval for that location, but the background check has met our requirements. So we'd like to issue that permit upon the completion of those inspections. And finally, we have a bar at 810 Northwest Broad Street that did not pay their annual beer privilege tax in time to keep it from becoming void, so they've had to reapply for their permit, and the background check has met our requirements, but they too are awaiting completion of their building code inspections.
All right, you have these beer permit applications as described before you. Is there a motion that we approve based on the recommendation of Ms. Wright?
So moved.
Mr. Gilly?
Second.
Mr. Young, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, this time you have the statements to be considered for payment before you. You've had an opportunity to review those. Is there a motion to pay the bills?
Move that we pay the bills.
Mr. McFarland
Second.
and Mr. Young, please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. As to board and commission appointments, I have none. Any other business? If there is no other business, you are adjourned.